The Vampire and the Hunter Who Hesitates. The forest had its own language at night. Branches spoke in soft creaks, leaves whispered secrets to the wind. The moon laid pale silver reflections across the ground, as if marking a path for anyone brave enough to follow it. Avery followed. She moved with the careful precision of someone trained to notice what others missed. The scuff of a boot where no one should have walked, the faint snap of a twig that hadn't been there earlier, the way birds fell silent in a widening circle. Hunting was never loud, at least not the kind she did. Her weapons were quiet, too. A short blade balanced for speed, a crossbow slung across her back, a pouch of consecrated salt she didn't truly believe in but carried anyway, because belief wasn't required for tradition. She believed in patterns, in evidence, in the old stories that turned out to be less story and more warning. The village at the edge of the woods had sent her a letter written in shaky ink. Livestock drained, strange marks in the snow, 2 people missing for a night who returned pale and confused and unable to explain where they'd gone. A vampire, the villagers said, like the word itself could summon one. Avery didn't scoff. She didn't laugh. She didn't lean on disbelief the way other people leaned on prayers. She packed, traveled, and arrived. And now she walked under the moonlight toward a ruin half swallowed by ivy, her breath misting in the cold. The ruin was old, older than the village, older than most maps. A broken chapel with the roof caved in and the stones stained dark with time. A place the locals avoided, which made it a place where secrets could stay hidden. Avery stepped over fallen timber, her crossbow already in her hands. There, a shape moved inside the chapel, not quite a shadow and not quite solid, too still, too aware. Avery lifted the crossbow and aimed. The bolt was tipped with iron and ash, bound with a strip of linen stained in something that smelled faintly of rosemary and smoke. She'd been taught it would slow them, not kill them. Killing required closer work. Her finger tightened on the trigger. A twig snapped behind her. Avery turned sharply, pivoting on the balls of her feet. Nothing. Only trees. Only moonlight. Only the sense, like a cold finger tracing her spine, that she was not alone in the way she had expected. The shape in the chapel shifted again. Avery refocused. She stepped forward. The air inside the ruin was colder, not just night cold, a deeper cold, ancient and patient, the kind that clung to stone and bone. "Come out," Avery said, voice steady. Silence answered. She moved farther in, boots crunching faintly on debris, a broken pew, a half-buried altar, ivy creeping in like a slow tide. Then she saw her. A woman stood near the back wall, just beyond a shaft of moonlight. Pale skin that caught the light like porcelain, dark hair loose around her shoulders, eyes that reflected silver, unlike an animal's shine. She was beautiful in a way that didn't feel designed for humans. Avery kept her crossbow trained. Don't move. The woman didn't move. She simply watched. "I'm not here to hurt the village," the woman said, voice quiet, almost weary. "And I'm not here to beg you." Avery's jaw tightened. "Then why are you here?" The woman's gaze flicked toward the broken ceiling, where moonlight fell like spilled milk. "Because this place remembers me." Avery's pulse thudded. The answer was too poetic to be safe. "Name," Avery demanded. The woman hesitated. "Selene," she finally said. Avery held the name in her mind, testing it. It sounded like moonlight and distance. "How many have you taken?" Avery asked. The woman's expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes shifted, like a door closing softly. Not from the village, not from people. Avery's jaw tightened. That's not an answer. The woman's gaze dropped, almost embarrassed. I take what I must, but not that. Avery studied her. Vampires lied. That was another thing Avery had been taught. They wore truth like perfume, close enough to fool, sweet enough to linger. And yet, Selene's voice didn't carry the slickness Avery expected. It carried tiredness, a kind of restraint that felt practiced. "You expect me to believe you survive on what?" Avery asked, skeptical despite herself. Selene lifted one hand slowly, palm open, showing she held nothing. "The forest," she said. "Animals. I hate it, but it keeps me from worse." Avery's grip tightened on the crossbow. She'd heard of it. Vampires who refused human blood. They were rare. Some hunters called them abominations. Others called them myths. Avery had never met one. She stepped closer, keeping her distance but narrowing the space. "You want mercy?" Selene's eyes met hers steadily. "No," she said. "I want to be left alone." The honesty startled Avery more than any plea could have. Avery raised the crossbow slightly, aligning the shot precisely with Selene's heart. Selene didn't flinch. The moonlight caught her face fully then, and Avery saw something she didn't expect. Not hunger, loneliness. Not the theatrical loneliness of stories, but something quiet and ancient, a weight carried so long it had changed her posture. Avery's finger hovered on the trigger. She could do it. She had been trained for this. The village would praise her. The old women would hang herbs above their doors and sleep easier. Avery would move on to the next letter, the next rumor. And yet her body didn't move the way it usually did. Some small part of her hesitated. Selene noticed. "You're not sure," Selene murmured. Avery swallowed. "Don't talk." Selene's gaze softened, almost curious. "You came here certain, and now you're listening." Avery didn't answer because the truth in that made her feel exposed. A wind moved through the broken chapel, stirring ivy and dust. Selene's hair shifted, dark strands lifting briefly like ink in water. Avery's eyes caught on Selene's throat. Too pale, too still, no pulse. Avery forced her gaze back up. "Turn around," Avery ordered. "Hands behind you." Selene's lips curved faintly, not mocking, something gentler. "I'm not going to run," Selene said. Avery's heart hammered. "Do it." Selene exhaled, a sound more habit than need, then turned slowly. Her hands moved behind her. Avery stepped forward, keeping the crossbow trained with one hand, pulling a length of cord from her belt with the other. She bound Selene's wrists tightly, expecting resistance. Selene didn't fight. Her skin was cold under Avery's fingers, and something in Avery's chest tightened unexpectedly, as if her body had recognized that cold and wanted to warm it. Avery stepped back, her breath shallow. Selene turned her head slightly, looking over her shoulder. "Are you taking me to be judged?" Avery's voice came out rough. "I'm taking you away from here." Selene's gaze held hers. And then? Avery didn't know. It was a terrible thing to not know. Avery motioned with her head. "Walk." Selene obeyed. They moved through the forest under moonlight, Avery behind her, crossbow ready, senses sharp. But the longer they walked, the stranger it felt. Selene didn't stumble, didn't try to flee, didn't lash out. She moved with the calm resignation of someone who had been hunted before and had stopped being surprised by it. Avery found herself watching the way Selene's shoulders lifted slightly when the wind gusted colder. the way her bare hands curled against her palms, as if she could still feel chill despite having no living warmth to lose. They reached a clearing where the trees thinned and the village lights glowed faintly in the distance. Avery stopped. Selene stopped too, waiting. Avery's mind raced. If she brought Selene into the village, there would be panic. There would be torches and shouting. The villagers wouldn't care about animal blood or restraint. They would want the story to end in the way stories always did, with the monster destroyed. And Avery wasn't sure she could offer Selene up like that. The hesitation grew sharper, almost painful. Selene turned slightly, careful not to strain the bindings. "You're thinking," she said. Avery's jaw tightened. "Stay quiet." Selene did. She simply watched the village lights with an expression that looked almost wistful. Avery made a decision. She stepped forward, reached for the cord, and untied Selene's wrists. Selene's hands fell to her sides. She flexed her fingers slowly, as if surprised by freedom. Avery stepped back, crossbow still raised. "Go," she said. Selene stared at her. "Why?" Avery swallowed. "Because you didn't hurt them." Selene's eyes softened. "You don't know that." "I do," Avery said, and surprised herself with how certain it sounded. Selene studied her face, as if reading something between the lines. "You'll regret this," Selene said quietly. Avery shook her head once. "Maybe, but not tonight." Selene's lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to say more. Instead, she nodded, once, slow and solemn. Then she turned and disappeared into the trees so smoothly, Avery almost wondered if she'd imagined her. Avery stood alone in the clearing, heart pounding, crossbow heavy in her hands. She should have felt relief. Instead, she felt something like loss. They met again 2 nights later. Avery hadn't planned to return to the ruin. She told herself she was simply checking to be sure the threat was gone, that she was finishing the job properly. But as she approached the chapel again, moonlight guiding her steps, she felt a strange pull in her chest, like a thread she hadn't noticed being tied. Selene was there. She sat on a fallen stone, posture relaxed but alert, as if she'd known Avery would come. Avery froze, crossbow lifting automatically. "I told you to go." Selene tilted her head. "I did." "Then why are you here?" Selene's gaze drifted over the ruined walls. "This is where you found me," she said. It felt right to return. Avery frowned. "That's not an answer." Selene's mouth curved faintly. "It's the only one I have." Avery stepped closer, cautious. "You could have killed me," she said quietly, the thought that haunted her since the clearing. "In the chapel, when I bound you, when I turned my back." Selene's eyes darkened with something that might have been sadness. "Yes," she said. Avery's stomach tightened. Selene continued, voice low. "But you hesitated. You looked at me like I wasn't only what you were taught to see." Avery's pulse thudded. "That doesn't mean I trust you." Selene nodded. "It shouldn't." They stood in the moonlit ruin, the air between them filled with cautious silence. Avery lowered her crossbow slightly, not fully, but enough to show she wasn't firing. "The village is scared," she said. Selene's expression softened. "I know." Avery watched her closely. "If you hunt here, they'll notice." "I don't, not anymore." Avery's eyes narrowed. "Then you'll starve." Selene's gaze dropped briefly. "Perhaps." Avery felt anger flare, unexpected. "That's not. You can't just." Selene looked up, surprise flickering. "Why do you care?" Avery's mouth dried. She didn't have a clean answer. "Because you're not what I expected. Because your loneliness feels familiar. Because my certainty cracked when I saw you stand still and accept death without pleading." Avery swallowed. "I don't know," she admitted. Selene's gaze warmed, infinitesimal. "That's a beginning." They began to meet without naming it. Always at night, always in places that felt old. The ruin, the edge of the forest, the abandoned stone bridge over a narrow river that reflected moonlight like a blade. Their conversation stayed careful, circling around truths without cutting into them too fast. Avery never fully put away her weapons. Selene never stepped too close. But slowly, the space between them changed. Selene spoke in fragments of the past, small enough not to drown Avery, but real enough to feel. She had lived through centuries, through wars and plagues, through eras where she had been worshipped and hunted and forgotten. She had learned to survive by disappearing, by becoming myth. Avery listened, unsettled by how tired Selene sounded when she spoke about time. Avery spoke of her own life in shorter stretches, her training, the way her mentor had taught her to see monsters everywhere, the way she'd learned to sleep lightly, as if danger might always arrive in the dark. Selene's attention felt unnerving at first, like being watched by someone who didn't blink, who didn't look away when the truth got ugly. One night, Avery arrived at the stone bridge with a fresh cut on her cheek, blood dried dark against her skin. She'd caught herself on a thorn branch while tracking something else in the woods. Nothing serious. But Selene's gaze fixed on it, and her whole body went still. Avery noticed instantly. "It's nothing." Selene didn't move closer. She simply stared, jaw tight, eyes dark. Avery frowned. "What?" Selene's voice came out strained. "The smell," she admitted. "It's difficult." Avery's pulse quickened. She lifted her crossbow slightly again, instinct rising like a wave. Selene's eyes flicked to the weapon and then away, shame and restraint tightening her expression. "I won't hurt you," Selene said, voice low. "But I need you to know, it's not effortless." Avery held her breath. Selene continued, swallowing. "I chose animal blood because I wanted to believe I could still be something other than hunger. But hunger does not stop being hunger simply because you deny it." Avery's grip on the crossbow loosened fractionally. Selene stayed where she was, hands open at her sides, like an offering of control. Avery's voice came out quiet. "Thank you," she said, surprising herself. Selene blinked. "For what?" Avery said. "For telling me the truth." Selene's expression softened, something like relief flickering behind her eyes. "You're welcome." The moon hung above them, silent and watchful, as if it too were waiting to see what they would choose. Spring came, slowly. The village stopped losing livestock, the fear eased, the rumors quieted. Avery should have left. That was what hunters did. They solved the threat and moved on. But each night she found herself returning to the ruin, to the bridge, to the forest edge, drawn by something she couldn't name without dismantling it. Selene was always there, as if she too had stopped being surprised by Avery's presence. Sometimes they didn't speak at all. They simply existed in the same space, the night wrapping around them like a cloak. One night, Selene led Avery somewhere different, a narrow path through the forest, hidden beneath ferns and low branches, until it opened into a small clearing where an old stone building sat half-collapsed under moss. Avery approached cautiously. "What is this?" Selene's gaze softened. "A library," she said. Avery stared. "Here?" Selene nodded. It belonged to a manor long gone. The family collected books. When they died, the books remained. Avery stepped inside, the air shifting instantly. Dust and parchment and old wood. The smell made something in her chest loosen, like stepping into a place where time moved more slowly. Shelves lined the walls, some collapsed, some still standing. Books sat in uneven stacks, their spines cracked but intact. Avery ran her fingers lightly along a shelf. "You've been here a long time," she murmured. Selene watched her with a quiet expression. "I come here when the hunger is loud," she admitted. "Books distract. They remind me I am more than appetite." Avery looked at her, something tender stirring in her chest. Selene's gaze dropped. "It's ridiculous, isn't it?" Avery shook her head. "No," she said softly. "It's human." Selene's eyes lifted, startled by the word. Avery swallowed. "Maybe not human, but it's what I recognize." Selene's expression softened in a way that made Avery's chest ache. They stood among ruined shelves in the moonlight, the world outside quiet, and for a moment, Avery forgot she was afraid. The first time Avery came without weapons, she didn't do it on purpose. She'd been cleaning them at home, distracted, thinking about the library and Selene's tired voice, and she left in a hurry when the moon rose, forgetting the crossbow on her table. She realized halfway to the ruin. Her heart pounded. She considered turning back. She didn't. When she arrived, Selene was waiting at the chapel, gaze flicking instinctively to Avery's hands. "You came unarmed," Selene said quietly. Avery's mouth went dry. "I forgot." Selene studied her, then nodded once. "Nonetheless, you came." Avery exhaled. I'm not trying to trap you." "I know," Selene said. The simplicity of that trust made Avery's throat tighten. Later that night, Avery sat on a fallen stone, and Selene sat across from her, a careful distance away. Avery said, quietly, "Do you ever wish you were different?" Selene's gaze drifted upward to the broken ceiling. "Every night," she admitted. Avery swallowed. "And yet you keep choosing." Selene looked back at her. "Yes." Avery's voice softened. "That matters." Selene's eyes warmed just slightly. "It does," she agreed. And in that quiet moment, Avery realized love wasn't always a sudden blaze. Sometimes it was the steady repetition of mercy. Summer arrived. The forest grew thick and lush. The night air became warmer, heavy with scent. The village held festivals again, and laughter carried faintly through the trees. Avery stood on the edge of the clearing one evening, watching Selene read in the ruined library, her face lit by moonlight spilling through a cracked window. Selene looked up, sensing her, and smiled faintly. Avery's chest tightened with a feeling that frightened her more than any monster ever had, because it wasn't fear, it was attachment. Selene closed the book and rose slowly. "You're restless," she observed. Avery swallowed. "I should leave." Selene got still. "Why?" Avery's voice came out rough. "Because I'm a hunter, and you're a vampire," Selene finished, voice quiet. Avery nodded, jaw tight. "This doesn't make sense." Selene stepped closer, stopping a full arm's length away. "Does it have to?" Avery's breath shook. "I don't know what to do with this." Selene's gaze softened. "Then do nothing," she said gently. "Just stay." Avery's eyes stung unexpectedly. She lifted away, ashamed of the emotion. Selene didn't move closer. She didn't force. She simply waited, patient as a century. Avery breathed in, then out. Then she nodded, once. She stayed. The next time Avery saw her mentor's silhouette on the edge of the forest, everything changed. It was late. The moon was thin. Avery was walking back toward the village when she spotted the figure between trees, tall, cloaked, still. Avery stopped, heart thudding. The figure stepped forward. "Avery," her mentor said, voice low. Avery's stomach dropped. "How did you—" "You've been gone too long," the woman said. "We heard rumors. We came to see what you missed." Avery's pulse hammered. "There's nothing here." Her mentor's gaze sharpened. "There's always something." Avery's hand went to her belt instinctively, but her weapons were not there. She'd left them. The mentor's eyes narrowed. "You've gotten careless." Avery swallowed. "I've gotten tired." The mentor stepped closer, voice like steel wrapped in velvet. "If there is a vampire here, you will bring me to it." Avery's throat tightened. She thought of Selene reading in the ruined library, Selene standing still in the chapel, accepting death without pleading, Selene telling the truth even when it cost her dignity. Avery's voice came out steady. "No." The mentor froze. "What did you say?" Avery lifted her chin. "No," she repeated. The mentor's expression hardened. "You're compromised." Avery's heart pounded. "I'm awake," she said, surprising herself with the word. "I see more than what you taught me to see." The mentor's jaw tightened. "You will regret this." Avery held her ground. "Maybe," she said, "but not tonight." The mentor stared at her for a long moment, then turned and disappeared into the trees, her presence lingering like a threat. Avery stood alone, shaking, realizing what she'd just done. She had chosen Selene, and now there would be consequences. Avery ran to the ruined library. Selene was there, as if she'd sensed the shift in the air. She stood with her head tilted, listening. "They're here," Avery said breathlessly. "Hunters, my mentor, they'll come for you." Selene's expression didn't change much, but something in her eyes hardened with an old memory. "Of course," she murmured. Avery's chest tightened. "We need to run." Selene watched her, quietly. "Why are you warning me?" Avery's voice broke slightly. "Because I can't watch them kill you." Selene's gaze softened then, something fragile flickering beneath the centuries. "Avery," she said gently. Avery shook your head. Don't make this harder." Selene stepped closer, stopping just shy of touch. "You've been making choices," she said softly, "and so have I." Avery's breath hitched. "What choices?" Selene's voice was quiet, almost reverent. "To keep my distance, to hold my hunger, to trust you with my weakness, to imagine something beyond survival." Avery's eyes stung. "Selene." Selene lifted her hand slowly, stopping just short of Avery's cheek, not touching, asking permission without words. Avery leaned forward the smallest amount, closing the distance herself. Selene's fingers brushed Avery's cheek gently, cold but careful. Avery closed her eyes, shivering. It was the first touch between them. It felt like a promise. They left that night, not fleeing in panic, but moving with deliberate quiet. Selene led them through hidden paths, places only someone who'd lived long enough to see forests change could know. They traveled toward the coast, where the air tasted of salt and the nights were softer. Along the way, Avery laid down her weapons, one by one, not thrown away in anger, not discarded in shame, but placed aside, like tools she no longer wanted to define her. Selene watched without comment. On the fifth night, they found shelter in an abandoned cottage at the edge of a cliff. The sea roared below, constant and endless. Inside, the cottage smelled of dust and salt. A fireplace sat unused. Old blankets lay folded in a trunk. Avery lit a small fire. Selene sat in the corner, eyes reflecting flame, posture still guarded, as if she didn't know how to occupy a space meant for living. Avery watched her, heart full. "Will you stay?" Avery asked quietly. Selene's gaze lifted. "With you?" Avery nodded. Selene looked out the window at the black ocean. "I don't know how to be in a life," she admitted. "Then we learn," Avery swallowed. "Then you would choose that?" Avery exhaled. "I already have." Selene stared at her, and for the first time the centuries in her expression loosened. She crossed the room slowly. Avery held still, heart pounding. Selene stopped in front of her, close enough now that Avery could feel cold air around her, like snow. "You're not afraid," she whispered. Avery's mouth curved faintly. "I am," she admitted, "but I'm here anyway." Selene's gaze softened, something like devotion flickering through. She leaned forward. The kiss was gentle, careful, less hunger than relief. Avery's hands rose, hesitated, then rested lightly on Selene's waist, as if she were afraid to hold too tightly and break the spell. Selene's lips were cool, soft, impossibly still. And yet, in that moment, Avery felt warmth bloom in her chest, spreading slowly like dawn. When they pulled apart, Selene stayed close, forehead resting lightly against Avery's. "I don't want to be alone anymore," Selene murmured. Avery's throat tightened. "Then don't be." Outside, the sea roared, ancient and unbothered. The moon drifted behind clouds, then returned, pale and watchful. Inside the cottage, two women sat close to the fire, and for the first time, the night felt less like a hunt and more like a home. In the weeks that followed, they built something quiet. Selene fed only on animals, and Avery helped, learning how prey could be taken without cruelty. Avery learned to sleep through the night again. Selene learned to sit in sunlight filtered through curtains without flinching. They found an old bookshop in a coastal town, the owner eager to sell it for cheap, too old to start again. Avery offered her savings. Selene offered a handful of coins she'd carried for centuries. They bought it together. On the sign above the door, Avery painted a simple name, Moon and Mercy. At night, they read by lamplight. Selene traced words with her finger, as if reminding herself she still belonged among them. Avery watched her, heart full. Sometimes hunters passed through town. Avery felt their gaze like a shadow, but no one recognized her now, weaponless, softer, alive. Selene stayed hidden when she needed to, but she no longer hid from Avery, and that was the difference. One evening, months later, they stood outside the bookshop beneath a sky scattered with stars. The air smelled of salt and paper and smoke from distant chimneys. Avery reached for Selene's hand. Selene hesitated for half a breath, then let Avery's fingers lace with hers. Her skin was still cold, but it no longer felt like absence. It felt like history held gently in the present. Selene looked at Avery, eyes reflecting starlight. "You gave up everything," she said softly. Avery shook her head. "I gave up the hunt, not everything." Selene's gaze softened. "And what did you keep?" Avery squeezed her hand. "You," she said simply, "and the part of myself that hesitates." Selene's lips curved faintly. They stood together under the stars, the world quiet around them, and the future stretching wide and unafraid. Not because danger was gone, but because they had chosen again and again to be gentler than what they were taught. And that choice, repeated over time, became a life. A life outside the hunt. A life worth keeping. A life that finally, softly, felt like home.